Stacktastic, the weekly web show for the avid comic book reader and those who aspire to become so. However, as the renaissance of the comic book movie appears to be hitting choppy waters, if not the beginning of the end, we'll see which comic book readers are left standing. As I recently stated on my other YouTube channel, Beyond the Trailer, I have a feeling that while comic book movies have been a much-needed shot in the arm for Hollywood, they are perhaps the worst thing to ever happen to the comic book industry itself. Today I'm going to discuss that in more depth, plus as always my recommendations for what comics to pick up or download this week. Let's get started. As you might have heard, MTV recently decided to shut down MTV Geek. And while AOL recently sold Comics Alliance and iFanboy has also folded, MTV Geek going dark is a much bigger deal because it means Viacom has essentially given up on fanboys. Yes, this is up there with NBC Universal's decision last year to discontinue G4. So what happened? Well, as many of us had already realized back in the day with Snakes on a Plane, the fanboy community is certainly very vocal, but that noise doesn't guarantee actual ticket sales. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Pacific Rim, Hollywood has definitely been burned when fanboy hype failed to produce box office results. Are fanboys fickle? No, instead I'd argue they are incredibly savvy. First off, unlike your mainstream moviegoer, they know how to illegally download and share movies. Plus, they do not do as they're told. Fanboys will turn on a movie as quickly as they praised it and rightfully demand high-quality product. The kind of blind loyalty that, say, Adam Sandler enjoys from mainstream moviegoers simply doesn't exist in the fanboy community. Every project is analyzed on a case-by-case basis, and sometimes that analysis alone is entertainment enough, even without seeing said project. Also, just because MTV labels something geek doesn't mean fanboys will come running. Not only is demand for fanboy eyeballs at an all-time high, but this is a group that doesn't just rely on one source for news and analysis, but several, so that they can cross-reference and form their own opinions. Yes, Hollywood is used to dealing with an audience that lets them lead, so as fanboys don't cooperate, the suits are choosing to pick up their toys and go home rather than adapt. I suspect that's because, horrifyingly, fanboys are able to spot and call out the obvious bad business practices that are rampant in the industry. And as Wall Street predicts that Hollywood is heading for a downturn, perhaps the suits will be forced to address those problems anyway. But not now, not until they're forced to. I also think that Hollywood's incredibly disrespectful treatment of the comic book industry has not helped. Sure, there are silver linings like AMC's The Walking Dead or Fox's recent deal with Boom Studios, but overall, and particularly with Disney and Warner Brothers, it's been like a walking tour of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. When Disney purchased Marvel and Warner Brothers decided to take a more active role at DC, I personally felt this might finally be the boost that comic books have needed to get the attention of the mainstream. After all, while the medium has evolved over the years, that's an evolution your average person is unaware of. However, instead of promoting the source material for all their new movies and TV shows, Disney and Warner Brothers have instead been bleeding those resources dry. And rather than let Marvel and DC Comics flourish creatively, instead they're being told by movie executives not to rock the boat. Top comic book talent isn't even consulted for most of the films based on their product, instead instructed to get out of the way. The ultimate insult is that Disney and Warner Brothers arrange free screenings for Marvel and DC Comics personnel just a few days before the films open, which is when many of those comic book professionals are seeing the movie about their characters for the very first time. How long before these bigwigs decide it's not worth producing comics at all, especially considering their low sales numbers in comparison to movie and TV viewership? This creates an incredibly stressful environment that, as we've all seen, results in not only poor creative and business decisions at Marvel and DC Comics, but incredibly poor treatment of their talent, especially in the case of DC, where the stress must be greater due to lagging behind Marvel on screen. This has resulted in a mass exodus of talent to independent publishers like Image, but since not everyone can land a movie or TV deal, this utopia can't last forever. Meanwhile, as Marvel and DC must keep churning out books, unknown talent is brought in that, quite frankly, hasn't been up to snuff these days. That's because of another one of the industry's dirty little secrets, that new talent is usually the friend of a friend, rather than the result of a legitimate talent search. Can comics be saved? Sure, I think and hope comics will always be around. But like in any industry, warning signs are never enough as long as money is being made. When money stops being made is when things will change. So if you're concerned about the industry, only buy a comic book if you really think you're going to enjoy it. They're so cheap that it's easy to stick with a title even when it disappoints, as I myself often do, but we are only feeding the beast. And on that same note, don't see a movie or watch a TV show just because it features your favorite comic book character. Instead, let's show everyone just how savvy we truly are. So on that note, I'm being particularly selective in what I recommend to you this week. Interestingly, DC has some good titles. Now, without a doubt, I think that Scott Snyder and Peter Tomasi are pretty much the only big guns the publisher has left. And this week, Tomasi dives into a new story arc in his former Batman and Robin title, now called Batman and Two-Face. But not only will this 5-parter be Two-Face's first big story in the New 52, but it will also focus heavily on the recently introduced Carrie Kelly. Then over in Wonder Woman, Brian Azzarello has not only made Diana the daughter of Zeus, but the new god of war. How will she define the role? Jump in here. And in Fables, Bigby finds himself stuck in the afterlife with some interesting company, Boy Blue. If any of you have stopped reading Fables, but really who would, you have to come back for this issue. Next, while some of us found Star Trek Into Darkness disappointing, everyone loves Benedict Cumberbatch and would like to see him succeed as Khan. Well, over at IDW, this alternate universe version gets fleshed out a bit with a new miniseries. I got the chance to interview writer Mike Johnson at Comic-Con, and I've put a link to that video at the end of this one and in the video description. And Dark Horse also has 2 good titles hitting shelves. One is the 2nd issue of Brain Boy, and I recommend you pick it up along with issue number 1 if you missed it. Fred Van Lente is writing a fun book here that happily doesn't feel like X-Men Light. Finally, Dark Horse is also debuting their own supernatural version of S.H.I.E.L.D. with Shoot First. Will you want to join the secular humanist occult obliteration task force, or at least keep reading? We'll see. And that's this week's Stacktastic. I'm Grace Randolph for Think About the Ink, and hope to see you back on Friday for Between the Pages. Until then, happy reading.